or the UN Charter, because we are a violent, lawless, criminal rogue state, and that is right and just. That's what it means. And there is near universal endorsement of that principle, among educated sectors at least, which should be taken as a warning by the world, and indeed is taken as a warning by the world, which doesn't like it, but can't do much about it. We're the ones who can do something about it. The official, and we seem to, at least judging articulate sectors, educated sectors, support it. The official stand during the bombing in December was quoted that we prefer to act through our allies, but we'll resort to force alone if we have to. Notice that we don't even prefer to act through the United Nations as required by international law and the Charter. We may defer, join our allies if they're willing to, but UN is out. In fact, the timing of the bombing was presumably intended as a slap in the face to the Security Council. The bombing was timed just as the Security Council was being called to an emergency session to deal with the question of Iraq, and it hadn't been notified. And if that didn't make headlines here, people understood it elsewhere. Things like that don't happen by accident, they were understood. Well, that's accepted across the spectrum, and it's accepted in other cases too. So take a look at the Rumpier meetings in Kosovo. There was a debate there about just what to do. The debate was between the United States and its allies, and the NATO powers, nobody else is around. And the debate was over the wording. Should the wording of the NATO decision to bomb be stated as being authorized by the United Nations or only being endorsed by the United Nations? The U.S. insisted on endorsed. As the New York Times put it, it wanted to avoid the neuralgic word authorized, which would entail that international law has some significance, and the U.S. won't accept that, even at the Turker level, and essentially the U.S. won, so the most they get to do is
identical with our
is endorse, not authorize. Let alone order, which is what these law requires. And it's not just in this case, it's in every case. So take, say, the bombing of Sudan last August. It's now conceded. Nobody tries to, very few even try to deny that the U.S. just bombed a pharmaceutical plant in Sudan and destroyed half of Sudan's pharmaceutical industry. Well, sometimes things go wrong. There's no talk about war crimes, no talk about reparations, not even any talk about an apology. I mean, why should we apologize if we destroy half of the pharmaceuticals in a poor East African country? Serious. Furthermore, that's accepted across the spectrum. Okay, there's a further history for this. 10 years ago, the United States took the same stand explicitly with regard to the World Court, dared to carry out follow a case against the United States and indeed to condemn the United States for the unlawful use of force in its war against Nicaragua. The United States position was clear and explicit. The State Department, Legal Department said that we cannot accept World Court jurisdiction. They explained why. The reason is that other states the right to decide when court rulings apply, and we must reject court rulings, I'm quoting now, for any dispute involving matters essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of the United States as determined by the United States. The example in question was the U.S. war against Nicaragua, and the United States determined that that was within its domestic jurisdiction, so the World Court could get lost. And that was done with virtually 100% support of educated intellectuals, including leading advocates of world order, who write articles in law journals, and so on and so forth. The New York Times dismissed the court as a hostile forum, and so it went. The court judgment was very reported, and it was radically violent. Okay, that's the World Court. This goes back much further. Back in 1962, Dean Acheson, highly respected statesman, senior advisor of the Kennedy administration, informed the American Society for International Law that a situation in which our country's power, position, and prestige
treated as an arena of blasted hopes and shattered dreams.
Epinephrine's also called adrenaline, right? Adrenal. See the resemblance?
Kennedy called the assault from within.
And this is just another
That's when he launched the assault
diagram again
from
showing
without.
you norepinephrine
Earlier
released on the
years it
target
had been a
organ. So you
secret.
think of sympathetic,
So in
you
earlier
think of
years, the
norepinephrine.
flat
And you can see
rejection
how
of
it'll, like, accelerate the heartbeat,
charter is
stuff like
explicit,
that.
very explicit,
And just
but
for
in secret.
detail,
Goes
if
back
you
to
take a
1947,
I don't know about biochar,
first
but definitely biochar,
memorandum
you
of the
know that
National
it's
Security
not that
Council,
simple. You don't
in
need
which
to worry
it
about
called
this, but
for
there's actually
national
an
mobilization in the
intermediate
United
step
States,
where the
support
spinal
for
cord projections
military
actually
action,
first go to
paramilitary
this ganglion,
action,
which
other
then
such
goes
things
to
in
the
Italy,
target
if
organ
the
and
communists
releases
took
any
power
there.
by
But
legal
don't worry
means.
about that. Just know norepinephrine sympathetic. Okay, parasympathetic nervous system. So we have another cool neurotransmitter besides glutamate and
Story goes on
ME,
from
which
there.
is extremely
The innovation in the Reagan years was that the contempt for international law became completely overt, wasn't even secret anymore under Clinton. It's lost any.
parasympathetic, rest and digest. Like, I have time to, finish my meal and do everything that I can do when I want to relax. And again,
It's available as a weapon against enemies, but nothing else remains except the theological dogma that we uphold world order international law. That remains, independently of the facts. So nothing else remains. Well, let's proceed. Turn to the United
We regard it as something
second pillar of
inside.
world order. This is a
And
tightly
most Western
integrated
people
document.
locate their ego inside their heads.
Conventionally divided into three parts: civil and political rights, socioeconomic rights, and what are called solidarity rights. The integration of all of those was stressed from the beginning. You look at the background, it's clear, repeatedly been stressed since. Time's short, so I won't run through the history. The major law review.
So the easiest one to start with is your cardiovascular system, so your heart, right? You're running away, you're scared, or you're meeting someone new for the first time that you really like, and your sympathetic nervous system turns on. Your heart's going to beat faster, remember that? So your heart actually has a
Universalization of
myogenic
rights
rhythm,
carried
which
out in
means
the
it
Universal
actually has a
Declaration.
muscle that
In short, there is
controlling
no
its
place
beating, but
for
what the
any
brain
sort of
does in the
relativist
sympathetic and parasympathetic
demand
nervous
that
system
certain
does
rights
is
must
it can
be
change how fast the heart beats.
relegated to
So
secondary
your heart's
status
beating faster,
in
your
accordance
blood
with, say,
pressure will
Asian
increase when your
values or
sympathetic
some other
nervous system is
pretext.
on. Your breathing
Glendon
circulates
also
nervous
points
blood
out
to your
quite
muscles, so you
accurately
can
the
run
support
away, and all that
for
good
that
stuff.
was very
And
broad-based
parasympathetic, right?
at the time.
Opposite.
Have to
Slower
remember the
heartbeat,
time. This is
like
right at the end of the Second World
vasodilation of the
War.
muscles,
There
blood
were
flow into the GI tract,
values of that
digestion,
kind, the kind expressed in the UD, were deeply entrenched in the anti-fascist
This sets
popular
up
forces
a
in Europe
fundamental
and in the colonial world and in the
sensation
United States.
of hostility
parasympathetic activity,
and
when you're
estrangement
resting, you have time to digest.
between
So what
ourselves
you do is you
and the so-called
stimulate the
external
secretion of the
world.
acids and enzymes needed for digestion. You move your small intestine with the contraction called peristalsis.
Well, there were some
and
who did
basically you can go to
dismiss
the
the Universal
bathroom,
Declaration
and
as
everything
meaningless.
that you would do while you're
So there's
relaxing.
an often quoted
And then-
phrase of Andrei
sorry.
Vyshinsky's, the Russian delegate whose record
in the heart
doesn't
and
have
the
to
GI tract,
pain us.
you can pretty
He
much see that
dismissed
they're,
the Universal
working in
Declaration
opposite.
as a
So, like, when the
collection
heart
of
beats
pious
up,
phrases.
sympathetic, it slows down with
And it was
parasympathetic.
dismissed
GI,
as
the opposite case,
quoting
right?
a letter to
Parasympathetic
Santa
turns it
Claus
on, speeds up
by
digestion.
Jean Kirkpatrick, Reagan's UN ambassador, who was deriding the socioeconomic provisions of the Universal Declaration. Moving on a couple of years, it is an empty vessel, a dangerous incitement,
Work together
preposterous.
instead of actually opposing each other is in the male reproductive system, and they work together for you to erect and ejaculate. So what happens is, in order to have an erection, right, you have to be stress-free. You can't be worrying about your test. So which one do you think is in charge of
Universal
erection,
Declaration
parasympathetic or sympathetic?
that was vetoed by the United
So
States.
parasympathetic
One America is beautiful for situations. And in a sense, this America is overflowing with the milk of prosperity and the honey of opportunity. This America is the habitat of millions of people who have food and material necessities for their bodies, and culture and education for their minds, and freedom and human dignity for their spirits. In this America, millions of people experience every day the opportunity of having life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in all of their dimensions. And in this America, millions of young people grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. But tragically and unfortunately, there is another America. And this other America has a daily ugliness about it that constantly transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. In this America, millions of work-starved men walk the streets daily in search for jobs that do not exist. In this America, millions of people find themselves living in rat-infested, vermin-filled slums. In this America, people are poor by the millions, and they find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. In a sense, the greatest tragedy of this other America is what it does to little children. Little children in this other America are forced to grow up with clouds of inferiority forming every day in their little mental sky. And as we look at this other America,
and that's worth understanding. A central component of the Bretton Woods system was regulation of finance. And there were several purposes for the reasons for this. One reason was that it was an effort, it was understood that deregulation of finance would harm
the slower moving one, but in the GI tract it does excite it, and in the heart it inhibits. So what does that mean? That means we need two different receptors on our organs that respond to norepinephrine or acetylcholine. So on the heart, for instance,
and it'll harm the general economy. That was one reason. A second reason was closely related to world order and human rights. One reason for both capital controls and keeping currencies within a narrow band was that that it was understood that deregulation of capital is a tremendous weapon against democracy.
ACH receptor on the heart to slow it down. So to see, you can't always have the same receptor on the same organ, or else it wouldn't respond right.
Man tries to make
And
sense
this
of
is
the
just
world.
showing you again. So, the heart there, you have your inhibitory ACH receptor, which tells your heart to slow down. Excitatory norepinephrine, heart speeds up. And then in the GI tract, if ACH is coming your way, it
Maybe
will
not
attach
Britain,
to
but
the
the other
excitatory
G7
receptor, and it will
countries, is that
digest.
currently major
You have an
currencies should
inhibitory
be kept
norepinephrine receptor
sort
there
of closely
too. So sympathetic
interconnected.
activity is being
Not
stimulated.
to
Norepinephrine will land there.
and that was rejected as crazy by U.S. Secretary of Treasury Rubin, because if we were to agree to that, it would mean that some other authority might determine that we're not allowed to lower interest rates to stimulate the economy if we want to. So if the economy is sinking into recession, we won't be able to allow interest rates because that'll affect currency values, and it would be crazy to allow any other country to allow us to any international organization to prevent us from carrying out those fiscal policies. Exactly the fiscal policies that we force on every other country, as the very same articles point out, without any sense of contradiction. also policies that are aimed at helping the population, let's say, instead of raising profits for investors, and are therefore irrational, like education or health or environmental policies or whatever it may be, you can force them to stop simply by pulling all the capital out of the country, which sends the country, forces interest rates up, sends the country into depression, the usual consequences. So therefore, unless capital is controlled, we've got a very sharply restricted
So basically the hypothalamus will tell the spinal cord what to project onto the organ, okay? So an example of this would be like in your heart, and this is actually called the barrow reflex, and this is just an example of how your hypothalamus is going to help your body maintain status quo, so like make sure that your blood pressure is never too high, your heart's beating at a normal speed. So like let's say
expansion
you're
of the social
hemorrhaging,
contract, the so-called welfare state, which turned the Universal Declaration into something a little more than a letter to Santa Claus. From the early 1970s, that system was dismantled. First, the initiative of the United States, Britain came along, later others, other major economies in the early 80s, and the results wouldn't have surprised the founders of the Bretton Woods system. The results have transferred. Some economists call it a transfer from a golden age to a leaden age. In the period since, there has been a slowdown of the economy globally, and the social contract has been dissolved dramatically in the U.S. and Britain, to some extent elsewhere. Inequality's gone way up. Consequences I have already described briefly. One region of the world temporarily escaped from this. That's East Asia. It's quite different from Southeast Asia. There was, quote the chief economist of the World Bank, there was an unprecedented economic miracle, which was based on the fact that they disregarded the religion, as he calls it, the religion that markets know best, and they disregarded the prescriptions of the international financial institutions, the so-called Washington Consensus, and they carried out an unprecedented economic miracle. In the early 1990s, South Korea liberalized capital flow.
Education for the human being should be developed strongly on the principle of responsibilities. He has duties to himself. He has duties to his kind, the humanity of which he is a part. He has duties to nature around him, over which he has a certain domination as a gardener, a worker in this particular world. He has responsibilities from the cradle to the grave, and these responsibilities he must fit himself for. If he fits himself properly for the responsibilities of living, he will have a reasonably constructive and helpful life.
Say one of several factors. That's a large factor in the subsequent collapse.
If, however, he loses sight of all the rules which every other creature in the universe must obey, and starts out on a solo flight to the satisfaction of his own appetites, he will very soon be in serious trouble. And the more serious the trouble is, the more rapidly it spreads through society.
1997 or 1998, the global economic system was considered
damaging the entire human race, and for that matter is extending into all the other kingdoms of nature in one way or another. Man today is destroying not only his own way of life, but the very planet on which he is living. Now, the universal law also has certain curves on it.
Losing all your blood
It goes so far
Mexico was an economic miracle during the period when the number
reaches a certain point, his various conducts become autocorrective. The individual either
absolutely absurd to say that we came into this world.
That I would learn a trade, that I would
We
study a
didn't.
profession,
We came
that I
out.
would do one thing or another to make myself more valuable to society, and therefore receive greater recognition from society. These things are personal decisions, and these decisions become the basis of growth and the development of our lives. Now, every child has to pass through certain stages toward adulthood. This is the body itself building its own way in life. It is the body gradually becoming capable of maintaining the dweller that lives in the body. What Noam calls the person in the body.
That we grow out of this world. That we, each one of us, are what you might call symptoms of the state of the universe as a whole.